People can't see me, don't worry.
We'll give it a minute or two. I think that's the etiquette, isn't it? Okay. Okay, let's kick off. Thank you everyone for dialing into this event at Labour Connected. Thank you for all our speakers here. We've got Ivana Bartoletti, data privacy expert and chair of the Fabian Society. Hallas, CEO of Coadec, policy voice for startups. And this is the second panel today. Just got off the chairing a panel with the Shadow Chancellor and Shadow DCMS Minister. And Darren Jones, MP, who is chair of the Bay Select Committee and one of the leading parliamentarians on AI. So thank you all for being here. And they'll all present their vision on the role of AI in Britain in the near future. Me, I'm Marcus Storm. I run AI products for Global Bank. I'm also active in AI policy and I'm representing the young Fabians here today. Please submit questions throughout and the speakers will answer them during their presentations or afterwards. I'm here tonight because I want you, the audience, to think, talk about and make political decisions on AI. I want you, your friends and colleagues and the whole country to talk about and make political decisions on AI. Because some people treat AI as just another productivity enhancing technology, which is a topic for regulators and technical experts to discuss. This is a serious mistake because AI is autonomous. That means we have to think about what we do when AI makes decisions we don't expect or hurts people. Don't get me wrong, AI is not human physically anyway, but when they take human-like actions, when their output is human, when we use them to replace humans, then we have to start thinking of them as like us. That's why everyone, regardless of age, experience, knowledge, technical expertise, background, has something special to contribute to this debate, because we need to hear how AI benefits you and affects you in your unique life. We're here to ask difficult questions that will make you think. Picture this for a minute. You drop your child at the first day of school, eagerly wait to meet the teacher, only to realize that the teacher is an AI. The school provides personalized educational virtual tutors for each student, highly tailored to their individual learning needs. They decide their curricula, mark their homework instantly, and adapt to increased interest in certain subjects and flagging attention. Teachers are now here for pastoral care, and there is much more pastoral care given the cheapness and availability of the e-tutors. How do you feel about this scenario? There might be a divide in opinion depending on what kind of background you're from, or what kind of generation you're from. Some of you might think, great, more teachers' pets, equal attention for all students. But some of you may think, especially if you're a teacher or a learning assistant like my mum, that this is you might have a completely different opinion on this scenario. What do you think about preventative healthcare being brought into treatment and being detected for potential risk of sickness, greatly increasing your chances of beating the disease rather than only being brought in through lots and lots of appointments after you're already sick? Would you say that the price of your personal medical data being held and used by the NHS and tech companies is worth paying for this benefit? What about preventative justice, where individuals likely to commit offences are identified and rehabilitated preemptively? And if you had a commercial dispute, you brought a product from a company which had faults, how would you feel about automated ombudsmen and lower judges who heard your case and delivered verdicts instantly rather than in weeks? Automated trading, killer robots, killer drones, what our global competitors are doing, what does this mean for us, Britain, as a country? In the past, we thought that all of these scenarios were light years away, but now all of these scenarios are happening somewhere in the world we live in, right now. A school near my mother's hometown in eastern China monitors children's brainwaves and moods with headbands and cameras, increasing their academic grades and output significantly at the cost of their privacy. Convincing AI-generated fake videos are used for entertainment and for much darker purposes, directly leading to political unrest in countries such as Malaysia and Gabon. GPT-3, the latest and most advanced language prediction model, wrote an entire article in The Guardian, which the editors said was easier to edit than human writers. And here in the UK, 50,000 school children are using an AI tool at school which aims to detect bullying and psychological problems through smart surveys. And some schools say that they've already reduced problems such as drug use by 20%. What is the cost of human lives versus human privacy? We talk often about redesigning the social contract, the agreement between what we give the state and what the state gives us. The future social contract stands on 3 legs, not 2. We must work out what kind of relationship we want between humans, the state, and machines who are like humans. A tripartite social contract which brings autonomous robots firmly within the law, rather than letting them exist in anarchy within our society. A common political refrain is that we human beings are more alike than unalike. Could this be the case with AI? To paraphrase a proverb, the best time to talk about this issue was 10 years ago. But the second best time is now. We are living with AI already. All the examples I've just given are future politicians' political battles, ones which elections will be fought on. So join the debate, connect with us, read our work. Everyone can and everyone must talk about how we want to live with human-like machines. The Fabians have been working incredibly hard to deliver a pamphlet for you this year. We've entitled it Modern Britain, Global Leader of Ethical AI. We published it today and it's free to read for everyone. We cover a huge variety of topics ranging from education, health, justice, policing, disinformation, we've already mentioned, to biases, finance, defense, the EU, USA, East Asia, and specific policy actions. Thank you to all the panelists today for helping bring this publication into the hands of the general public. Please read about AI, discuss it at the pub while you still can, dinner table, living room, online. Send us your thoughts via the contact details posted in the chat. Only together can we venture into the unknown, exciting future, and build a better Britain. Ivana.
Thank you. So first of all, let me say thank you to you, because I am absolutely amazed by, first of all, by the work that you young Fabians do. I mean, it's just incredible. And that's just testament to all the hard work and dedication. But I'm also really pleased that you're engaging with this issue, and I'm really pleased that you are wanting to bring the topic of artificial intelligence to the pub before 10, to the mainstream public, to the public, to the media. And I want to start by saying it's what we've got to do right now, because AI is not just technology. AI is about power. It's about the geopolitics. It's about the politics of data. It's about a lot of the issues underpinning the way that we live now and the way that we live in the future. It has the power to scale up inequality, to turn prejudice into stereotypes by embedding and coding inequality and social the inequalities that we have in our social structures into the systems that we create. So the enormous power of artificial intelligence is something that we have to deal with. But I want to say one thing. When people talk AI, they think Terminator. When people talk AI, they think a robot. They think of, the machine, and this is where the problems start, because AI is not Terminator. AI is not the robot who's going to take over our lives and decide and think the way we do. That's not nowhere near, and it's probably not going to happen. But what we should be worrying about is what AI is right now. And what it is machine learning used to create patterns of behavior, to put us into categories and be able to hack into our weaknesses, our sadness, our fears, and target us online at that point in time. We should be worrying about the supercomputers pointed at us as we browse the internet. We should be worrying about Cambridge Analytica and what that means when research data becomes data for manipulation. And we need to worry about what happens when you and me, Marcus, Dom, see different things, because you and I are different. The algorithm knows and starts serving us news that are different from us. And if this happens, then the basic of democracies have gone, because we haven't got the same news to discuss and the same basics of information to talk about. We need to talk about algorithms that discriminate, racist algorithms. We need to talk about algorithms that perpetuate social inequalities. And we need to talk about the predictive algorithms that create and edit the past, present, and the future. Because if I know, because of the historic data that I've got, if I know that a particular segment of my population in my local authority is going to be vulnerable, and I start targeting them and wrap surveillance around them, then what I'm going to create is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I'm violating the wonderful principle of privacy, which is personal autonomy. It's not about my individual data, my individual rights. It's personal autonomy, the idea that you grow and develop. And predictive analytics is something that is all about algorithms editing the relationship between the past, the present, and the future. So these are the things that we should be worrying about. So the first point I want to make is, let's not think about Terminator. Let's think about what AI is doing right now. Let's think about data in the first place. Let's think about what is the social contract between us as individuals and our data. And this is, so that's the first point. The second point that I want to make is around one thing that we've got to do, and I really would like the young Fabians to really lead on this. We've got to stop thinking that data-driven decisions are good. They may not be. We must stop thinking that, oh, this data, amazing things. Yes, data is great. It's great. Oh, no doubt. I worry about misuse of data as much as I worry about misuse of data. But I've got a problem here. And the problem is that the data out there is just a photo of society as it is now. And let me tell you, I don't want to code all this stuff and society as it is now in algorithms deciding the future, because I don't like it as it is now. I agree with Keir Starmer. I don't like it as it is now. His speech was fabulous. I want to change it. So I don't want the data society as it is today to be coded into the systems deciding access to schools for the children of tomorrow. So first thing we've got to say is data is not neutral. Let's stop talking about this. There's nothing neutral about data. If I want a photo of how many engineers are in the world, there's nothing neutral. It'd be mostly men. If I want a photo of areas they've got higher level of criminality, I'm telling you, that data will show you a particular demographics. That is because of structural inequalities in this country and around the world. So there's nothing neutral about data. Even collecting data is a choice. In my book, I call it data violence. I know it might be a bit strong, but it is. If I choose that you, Dom, go into a data set and you, Marcus, don't, I'm making a choice. I'm elevating Dom and disregarding Marcus. Choosing a data set, making a choice like that is a political choice. Whether I collect everybody, elevate them to materials from my data set because I want to surveil a particular segment of the population, say Black people, I'm making a choice there. So there's nothing neutral about data, as there is nothing neutral about technology. A technological product is a techno-social artifact, which operates in the world, is designed by humans. So the point I want to make here is that AI is not something independent from us. AI is created by human beings. We create it. We define the choices, the parameters. We decide which data goes into it. We decide in particular what we're going to use it for. So that's where the important debate starts. And the debate is, what are we going to use this technology for? What's the purpose? And a lot of the ethical debate that we've had over the last few years has all been around how are we fixing a machine? How we make it ethical? How are we fixing an algorithm? How are we fixing an algorithm so it doesn't discriminate against Black people? Fine. But I want to move beyond the fixing the algorithm. The first question that we should be asking in terms of the social contract is, what do we want this technology to do? Do we want it to use it for predictive analytics? Are there any no-go areas? For me, for example, a totally no-go area is an automated weapon. The me is you can't go there because I don't want a machine to make a decision about life and death at that point. But the point is, what are we going to use this? Are we going to agree, for example, that precision medicine is actually a good thing? I believe it is. Are we going to agree, for example, that the ability to support young children in education with their emotional, with their needs, if they have a disability, is a good thing? It could be. And what makes it good? We've got to decide this. We have to decide what are we going to use AI for, because as we said before, it cannot be left to the PR departments of the big corporations to say that a product is good. The problem is what is happening over the last few years is, rather than us deciding what we're going to use AI for and adapting technology to our goals, it's been ourselves adapting to the technology put forward by the largest corporations, which have now become major infrastructures of the world we live in. So that has got to change. Technology is a great thing. And the thing is, what is it for that matters to me? The younger generation, the younger people, what do we want this tech for? To do that, that's where we need to engage in a conversation. And this is where people will want to keep you out of the conversation, because they will say, oh, AI is complicated. No, it's not. Is it difficult what I'm saying? No. Talking about the purpose of what we're creating is not complicated. Do we want robots? Do we want robots that look like human beings, especially women? Do we want to create a new digital, robotic, female-looking digital servitude? I don't think so. The reason why I'm saying this is because the key point here is not to worry about what AI potentially could do, but it's really about deciding here and now, what do we want artificial intelligence to do in Britain? How do we want to augment human capabilities, and what do we need to augment human capabilities with? Where are the uses of AI that we actually like, that we think are positive, they bring us together, they're good for education, health, to cybersecurity? And that's where we need to invest. The last thing I want to say is about data, and this is where I really need, I think, a lot of help from everyone. We need help from everybody, and this is around the concept of privacy. There is one thing that has really infuriated me during this pandemic, and this is the idea that those who wanted contact tracing and who want contact tracing, like me, we've been told that there is some sort of dichotomy, that we either want health and we want to survive and we want this sort of big applications. I'm in favor of an app, obviously. So there's the one end, the health, we want health at every cost. On the other end, there is privacy. This dichotomy between security, between health and privacy. We've seen it before after 9/11 in the US, and it was the dichotomy between security and privacy. And this dichotomy, this contraposition between you either want security or you want privacy, you can't have both. This is, I think, very complicated and is wrong. There is no dilemma there because we can have both. We can have both. And by pitching privacy versus security or privacy versus health, we're ending up in a false argument that is very risky in the age we live in. We can have both. We can do things in an ethical way. We can build privacy by design. We can have privacy enhancing technologies. We can do that. We can use synthetic data. We can use federated learning. We can use all that. That's my field of work. I work in privacy enhancing tech. This is what we can do. But there is also something else which I want to close on, which is the issue of privacy in itself. Guys, I am not sure that privacy as we've known it as an individual right will stand moving on. If we're getting used to unlock our phone using our faces, if we are using, I think privacy is changing. Privacy is different in China as it is in the US. And it's different because technology changes. It changes it with the development of tech as well. I think this is the time where we need to look at privacy in a different way, which is not longer the idea of the user-centric consent model, but we're moving towards an idea of privacy as a collective good. Somehow leveraging what we've learned during COVID, which is that there is nothing more public than a piece of personal information. And I think if we have the capacity to focus on privacy as a collective value and translate that into policies, I think we can move a long way. But that requires some really new and radical thinking about data. And I think I would hope, and I really hope that with the young Fabians can also drive, amongst the many things that you're doing, a conversation around what privacy means, what it means to be private, what is privacy in the age of AI, and what do we need to do to make privacy a great collective value. So that's for me now.
Thank you, Ivana. Dom, take it away.
Thanks very much. And it's been really interesting to hear just the contributions that you guys have had so far. I think for those people on the call that don't know, my name is Dom Hallas. I'm the executive director of an organization called the Coalition for a Digital Economy, or Coadec for short, and we represent tech startups in the UK in public policy debate. And so, you know, across the whole span of public policy issues, the future of AI policy in all its forms is absolutely critical to those conversations. And one of the interesting things I was reflecting on as I was hearing some of those contributions was, you know, I often describe, the biggest question we get at Coadec is, well, what is a tech startup anyway? You know, like what does that mean when in a world when so many businesses are digitally enabled? And the truth is, it's always been quite intangible and hard to define. But I've always said, like, part of the problem with that definition is ultimately that it thinks of businesses in a sort of vertical way as opposed to a horizontal way. And the nature of technology businesses, as we see it in the tech startup ecosystem, is that actually they're impacting on every part of the economy, on every part of potentially of life. And I think that that's why it's so important to have the kind of discussions and the holistic conversations that we're having here today. But it's, you know, that sort of concept of that, the breadth as well as the depth is exactly as pertinent a discussion to be having about the future of artificial intelligence. And I agree completely with Ivana. I think one of the things that really strikes me is actually like there's, you know, we're really focused on from the sort of tech startup perspective, the immediate here and now of like there are businesses out there doing things in these markets, and what does that look like? How can we make sure that they're the right kind of things and that they're benefiting society, and that, you know, the companies that are making money off this are paying their taxes and doing all the things that we would want them to do. And so I want to sort of talk a little bit about a bit of research that we conducted earlier this year with AI startups. It's not something that we published thus far. It will be published in due course, on what they want from a sort of a government, whether that's on, you know, the whole breadth of potential policy smorgasbord, you know, both in the regulatory front and elsewhere. I want to talk a little bit about the sort of their experiences of regulation, and then a little bit of reflection on what other people have said. So I think the starting point is that what's really important in this discussion is that we don't lose sight of the businesses that are in the market now operating and doing things, and that we don't have a conversation that is about what I would, you know, about sort of quote unquote ethics that actually detaches itself from business operation in the market. And the reason why that's so important is because the truth is, like, if we detach those two discussions, if we detach the kind of the theoretical conversations around the future of policy, which ourselves and others and, you know, everyone on this call will be really interested in, from the people who are operating inside businesses, whether that be small business founders, you know, the entrepreneurs we work with, or people in larger corporates, then actually, like, what you'll get is a two-tier, you know, a fork in that conversation, which means that even if our discussion here is, you know, exactly what we want, and we have the ideal vision for how we would want to design AI for society, that won't happen because the people who are operationalizing that haven't been in the conversation, and we've not truly understand their experience of the discussion. And so I think, like, the ability to explain and understand how people are developing policy now is really, how people are developing right now is really important. And it's particularly important because the truth is, from our perspective as a startup organization, we find that the bulk of the companies we're working with aren't people who were set up 15 years ago and operate in a sort of modus operandi of the way in which traditional, the businesses that everyone considers in this space might operate. They're actually people who have grown up and built their businesses in the shadow of many of those businesses and think deeply about some of the issues that we're talking about here today. And, you know, for want of a better word, want to get it right. They want to make sure that they're building businesses that are doing things in the appropriate way, in an ethical way. And, you know, and some of the challenges that come with making sure that, you know, algorithmic justice is in place, and we're not having racist algorithms, we're not using AI in the wrong way, actually, as Ivana was sort of rightly pointing out, comes down to questions of, you know, incomplete data sets, right? As in, like, you know, there's like, and so the question then of can AI companies acquire the data that they need to in an appropriate and privacy appropriate way to be able to build the right kind of products really matters. And so the bread and butter of data acquisition costs are too high, or public sector data isn't being shared in a way that would be appropriate and benefit the public sector, becomes very important, because that all filters down. It's all the question of, like, how are these products being developed and what are the barriers to doing so in the right way. So there are sort of three core things that we hear time and again from these businesses of what they need to be building their businesses and hopefully impacting the world in the right way. The first is access to the right kind of talent. And so the starting point is that 43% of AI businesses based in London at the moment have a non-UK founder, right? And an awful lot of those founders come from the European Union, so obviously the knock-on impact of potentially leaving the European Union and the free movement will come, that will be very important. Importantly, and I think this is really important for the future skills policy stuff, is that only 25% of those businesses have a female founder. Now, that's actually better than the international average, but absolutely shockingly poor. Like, and the truth is, like, that framing and that understanding of, okay, how do we build the kind of talent that will then flow through, both from the sort of junior end, where you're sort of getting into the ecosystem, and then building your own businesses as you go, ties directly back into those conversations about making sure that we use AI in the right way for society. The second then comes to access to finance, and the you know, these businesses that are R&D intensive, that take time to develop, and importantly, they take even longer to develop if you're doing it the right way, as opposed to cutting the corners that we often have seen result in poor outcomes. Like, you need the kind of long-term patient capital to be able to do that. And whether that's a future that looks like they're attempting to map it out in this government, where it's a sort of state aid-led system, whether it's encouraging public sector pension funds to invest more so that we can see actually the pensioners benefit from the potential success of these companies. Like, there has to be a conversation about how we build a patient capital ecosystem in the UK that can drive the deep tech ecosystem in a way that we haven't seen thus far over the course of the past 10 years. And that's the next big step that we're looking at. And then the third, as I said, is the availability of those data sets. So whether that's the cost implications, whether that's the accessibility implications, there are huge challenges to how companies can access the data that they need to appropriately train the algorithm to deliver the outcomes that we need. And so that's another really big question that we want to have. And I think that, like, that, when I think about the framing of that discussion, and I think it's something that Darren and I have spoken about previously, it's a lot of that has to be then about how we understand as a society where we have really great data sets. So, you know, our national health system has a huge, like, wodge of data that we have never truly understood how to harness in a way that benefits society, where we're able to use leverage the talent of people in tech startups in an ethical way to be able to do that and explain to the public and have a proper detailed conversation like the one we want to have about the potential benefits of personalized medicine, and why it's worth having that health data, being used in that way. And so I think they're the really big chunky questions that it's really important to have, and it's really important to have through these kind of forums. I'll leave you with sort of one thought, and I think it's a framing in how the current sort of stream of technology startups is slightly different to what it might become before. Is when we surveyed startups through this process, we found that 60% of the startups we surveyed in the AI ecosystem, I'll finish up before I go answer the door, I promise. 60% of the people in the startups we surveyed said that they'd engage with a regulator as part of the process, whether that was through healthcare, whether it was at the FCA, whether it was whatever, the existing regulatory ecosystem within their vertical. And more than half of those people said that engagement was beneficial, that they said that it was really either very or really or worthwhile. So it was like they found it a positive experience to understand how to engage with a regulatory system that exists, to be able to understand how to apply their work. And building on that, like, we saw that people who worked with, for example, regulatory sandboxes, which is understanding how to engage with the existing regulatory ecosystem in a way that could potentially benefit and work with regulators along with companies, like 78% of them found that a useful experience. So we see that there's a sort of willingness to collaborate, that there's a sort of success in collaboration when it does it. But the open question is how we encourage a sort of, not just a collaboration from the business end and then a separate discussion about ethics and a sort of conversation among civil society, but merging those two conversations in a way that drives, okay, this is how there's potential economic benefit and this is how there's a potential societal benefit, and we need to make sure that those two are aligned in the right way. So I'll finish up there. I'm going to run back to the door, but I'm really looking forward to an interesting conversation from here.
Thanks, Tom. Darren, you're up, and there are a couple questions in the Q&A if you'd like to weave them in, or else we can leave them until afterwards.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. I might leave them until afterwards because the idea of speaking and checking the Q&A on my iPad at the same time will just cause me no end of problems, I imagine. Thank you, Marcus, for the invitation to be with you today and for organising this important panel and for organising so many events, as well as the Young Fabians conference this year, which is fantastic to see. It takes a lot of time to put these together, so hats off to you. It's always a pleasure to be on the platform with the Fabians, the Young Fabians, with Ivana and with Dom, and we all get around this circuit quite a bit talking on this topic. So I always enjoy the opportunity to catch up with what people are working on and what they're thinking about on these topics. For those in the kind of audience that perhaps I've not worked with in the past, I'm the Labour MP for Bristol North West and chair the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee in the House of Commons. I'm also on the AI APPG, so I play the international role as the vice chair on that. And I'm one of the parliamentary champions at the OECD's AI Observatory, and I chair something called the Institute of AI, which I'll come back to later. Needless to say, I have an interest in AI through the work that I do. And before I begin, and I think my comments today will be more kind of practical from a policy perspective, as opposed to responding to what colleagues have said in their thoughtful contributions. I always start with the question of kind of what is AI, and Ivana's right. Well, I hope she's right. There's no Terminator coming down Whitehall at the moment. But from my perspective, you know, it's a general purpose technology. It's one of these things like electricity, like radio frequencies, like the internet, that's going to change everything. How we make things, the way we build and supply public services, the way in which we learn, the way in which we shop, the way in which we spend money, how we decide to go on holiday, presumably when we can do that again. You know, all of the, how we build medical products, the whole thing. And a lot of that's already with us today. And different countries are doing it in a more advanced way than other countries, and other companies are more advanced than other companies, and so on and so forth. And so the starting point for me is, okay, well, how have we operated with these general purpose technologies in the past, where you can't really understand or regulate or think about policy on a kind of technology by technology specific basis, apart from the extremes like, you know, autonomous weapons and things. And the answer, in my view, is around standards and around international regulation. And that might sound a bit dull, but actually it's really very important. And so my contributions today are going to focus a little bit on industrial strategy from my perspective as the chair of the committee, and then a little bit on standards and international regulation. And then I'll leave it at that. So from an industrial strategy perspective, you know, the UK has been a leader in AI research for a very long time. Lots of companies that Dom represents and others kind of working in this space. The industrial strategy, which was launched by Greg Clark when he was Bay Secretary of State, who now chairs the Science and Technology Committee, had a specific kind of remit for AI policy in the UK. We set up some kind of organizations called the Office of AI and others. We funded kind of PhDs and doctorates on this issue. We're very good in the UK at research. We're good at startup. We're not so good at scale up. We're not very good in terms of its adoption into kind of more traditional businesses. We're really bad at adoption in public services. And all of this is in the industrial strategy because, of course, it links to economic productivity. We've not been very productive as a country compared to European countries for a long time in the way we make things and the services that we provide and the public services that we deliver. And I've always been a kind of evangelist about how AI, but also more broadly technology, has to be the key to kind of unlocking that productivity and as a consequence improving wages and profits and the efficiency of running our public services. So I start from a positive position on this. My committee is currently doing an inquiry into post-pandemic economic growth. And under that, we've got two kind of chapters open at the moment, one reviewing the industrial strategy and the other reviewing levelling up, which is what's the institutional structure that you need in order to be able to deliver growth locally. Sorry, I was hesitating there because you can probably hear the bells ringing in the background, and I didn't think we were voting, but the good news is we're abstaining, so I can carry on. Under the industrial strategy, our first hearing is on Thursday. We're going to look at the performance of how that's helped us deliver in AI adoption in terms of productivity, and I think we've got much more to do. Linked to that, of course, is our role in the world, which I suppose sounds quite grand, but Britain had for a long time, but is beginning to fall behind, led the debate internationally on AI, not just in terms of research and building products and applying products, but thinking about the ethics of AI, how you use AI for good, the remits in which you want to apply these technologies. I say we've fallen behind a bit because you look to, for example, the G7, they've put together a body now to look at AI adoption across the developed nations. There's some good work going on there, but Britain hasn't really been digging in as much as, say, France and Canada. I would like us to see us do more of that. Yesterday, I chaired a meeting with the Deputy Secretary General of the ITU, which is the Information Telecommunications Union at the UN, and the UN plays a role in satellites and radio frequency regulation in this kind of global standard setting. And it started to look at AI, and there's no global treaty on AI because one hasn't developed yet. Implementing ethics in a global treaty is very difficult because, of course, different countries and regions have a different view about what ethics actually is. But interestingly, and this was the most important bit of feedback from a kind of parliamentarian's perspective, is that at the ITU, it's a partnership between nation states and the private sector. There were two interesting trends. One, the private sector has been sending more and more and more people to the ITU in order to set standards and regulatory kind of positions. And there's a commercial reason for that, because if you have a patent and you set a standard, you can license it in different parts of the world, and that's an effective way of doing business. Nothing wrong with that, perhaps. The other trend was that nation states haven't really been going as much. They've not been putting in the same number of people or resource or capacity to engage in these debates. And there's been a very significant trend away from kind of Western Europe and America and Canada towards Asia. So the kind of civil servants or officials or ministers engaging are now increasingly on the kind of Asia Pacific side of the world, as opposed to the kind of Europe and United States side. And you couple those two together and it's caused some political concern. Everybody will know the debate that's been going on in the UK and the US about Huawei and the geopolitics of technology, and this is really important. And the standards that are being set at the moment are being set largely by private companies with an Asia tilt, plus legislator officials on behalf of countries such as China. And the UK hasn't really been engaging as much. I was pleased to hear that the Foreign Office Minister in the House of Lords, who's responsible for the UN, so Lord Ahmed, has said that we're going to start engaging more on this issue. And I think there's a huge opportunity here for Britain in the kind of post-COVID, post-Brexit world. First of all, we've got to decide where we're going to go with this. Are we going to still be kind of pro-EU regulatory kind of stances on this, or are we going to end up going more pro-US deregulatory stance, or are we going to try and sit somewhere in the middle? And how do we engage at the G7 and the UN and others on this important issue? And the last thing I would just mention is that the meeting that I chaired yesterday is through a group I've set up called the Institute of AI, which is for legislators around the world interested in this topic. And we had representatives from, I think we were up to 12, maybe 13 countries. We did 2 different ones because of time zones. The same outcome came from both of those conversations, which was a concern that we don't have sufficient capacity in our parliaments or equivalent bodies to provide the check and balance, not just for the private sector, but for the government and executive use of AI technologies. Now, you can imagine, the legislator that came from Hong Kong had a particular view about his situation, but equally the congressman from the US shared the same view, as did some of our European colleagues. And so when we think about the kind of new social contract, it's not just about what does the state provide to citizens and what do citizens have to do in return in terms of rights and responsibilities to access those services. But from a democratic position, it's also about parliamentary oversight of that, to ensure that you have the check and balance about an executive not going too far, or at least doing things in the right way, but also ensuring that private companies do things in the right way too. We've got a lot of work to do on that. And so I would share Marcus's call to arms at the beginning about talking about this, about raising it in the different spheres that you operate in, about requiring it from your politicians, if you're in your businesses, kind of stimulating this conversation and making it more of an expectation that it's not just something that's a bit geeky or niche or kind of techie that we don't need to worry too much about, but actually we've really got to try to understand this. We've got to work together domestically and internationally in order to get the most benefit out of it. But we've really got to make much more progress in setting the parameters about what isn't acceptable, because if we don't do that, you're going to end up with problems or scandals or issues that means that people won't trust it, or you end up in conflicts between countries, and then you're not going to get those positive gains from implementing something like AI in terms of jobs and wages and profits and better public services. And I'll stop wittering on and leave it there, Marcus.
Thank you so much to all of you again for your unique perspectives on AI, and see that the audience is getting excited this and make questions. So we're going to take some of those now. I've seen some great ones here. Let's start off with one by Benedict. Benedict asks about unions. So unions have historically found it difficult to break into tech companies. Is it important for the left to have a new mindset to build frameworks within tech companies that allow voices to be heard, and how do we do so? I'd quite like Dom to provide his perspective on this. Dom.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, funnily enough, actually, I saw a story today. I don't know whether you guys saw this, but apparently there has been a new union set up specifically for technology workers in the UK. That was it. It was in Wired today. If anyone wants to look, I'll put the link in the chat. But I mean, I think it's an interesting question, because what I would say is I think that, and I can only speak from a startup perspective, but I think it's also reflected in somewhat freewheeling culture of different, and it depends an awful lot on exactly which tech companies we're talking about. The truth is there has always been a perception within these companies, and certainly is at early stage companies that have intentionally built this culture and haven't got to the scale yet where it's sort of it becomes to be lost, if that makes sense, of actually a fairly open and direct way of engagement anyway. And so I think like the challenge comes where you get to a certain scale and that the concept of that culture then becomes, frankly, oftentimes problematic, and what it morphs into is something quite different. I mean, I as sort of someone who works with these companies at early stage, I think the interesting question is like how you build those company cultures, and what role, when we're working at really early stage companies, what role potential unions can play. I think it's an interesting discussion. I don't have an answer to that question, but I think this is it's certainly one of the areas that we're keen to have more conversations about.
Thank you, Dom. Question for Ivana. Do you think only the left of politics can ensure that there's an ethical framework for AI?
That's a good question. So, well, it depends on what this means. So, what does it mean, an ethical framework of AI? So it's so if the discussion is around what we're going to use, so discussion is around what we're going to use around AI for, and we need to discuss what are the principles underpinning the use of artificial intelligence. What do we think about fairness in the outcomes that we want to achieve? And of course, there are many different opinions around that. Fairness, for example, can mean many different things to me, to you, can mean many different things to a consumer lawyer, and then it's something else completely different to a mathematician. So when it comes to ethics of AI, is that we are discussing the values around why we want a specific product to do, what are the intended and unintended consequences. So we don't legislate ethics. We don't do that. Ethics can inform the legislation. Ethics can drive some of the thinking around the legislation, but to ultimately, ethics starts either before or when legislation ends. Ethics is what is not covered by the law. So you can have the company developing a system, for example, for facial recognition. They can define what ethics means to them. What are they ethical? Which way are they ethical? They can say that they're ethical because they developed a perfect product that is completely fair and does not discriminate against anybody. But then the ethical debate remains. And the ethical debate is, well, do we want to be surveilled? Do we want facial recognition to be watching us when we are in our public spaces? So ethics is really about, in my view, is really about what happens when the law ends, what happens where we are making decisions about the unintended consequences of a specific product that we are deploying. So it's to an extent is something that involves citizens' participation, consumers and users, that involves the capacity really to look honestly when developing a product and put it out there. What are the consequences, and having an honest debate around it.
Two questions for Darren from Bella and Liz. How can we establish global rules for AI and other similar technologies? And what is your view on the issue of who owns and controls these technologies?
Two great questions. I mean, on the global rules issue, I mean, this is increasingly difficult, and that's why in my opening remarks I kind of separated standards and interoperability from regulation from ethics, and I think it's useful to see them in three different kind of buckets of work. So standards and interoperability is really important. We know we can do complicated work on that in terms of international treaties because of the example I gave, the ITU work on radio frequency and satellite spectrum, for example, where there is a consensus about how you use things. And actually that foundation makes it much easier to do the kind of second and third bucket of work. But we've still got a lot of work to do to try and, get anywhere near a treaty around AI standards. The second thing on regulation has to build on that. But of course, different countries have a different view about regulation, even if you share the same values. So, the United States Congress is not going to regulate at a federal level in the same way as the European Parliament will. Some states in the US might, like California, but you're never going to get through Congress and so the House of Reps and the Senate with European-style regulation, whereas in Europe, we are much more comfortable with kind of taking a regulatory approach, and who knows where the UK is going to go post-Brexit between that. And the final thing there around ethics is, as Ivana said, whose ethics? They're very, very different in different parts of the world, and you're never going to get an agreement around an ethical framework that's in a treaty or in a kind of global, there is no thing as a global regulation really, but that's copied in different jurisdictions. And so you've got to have those debates in three ways. But I think you can make progress, but we've got a whole journey to go on, because we've not made anywhere, we've not even made a start really, in my view, on these things. In terms of ownership, I mean, this goes back to lessons learned from previous kind of industrial revolution and what that means for inequalities in regions and nations of the world and countries. Is without, I think it's without doubt really, that at the moment, if you look at who has the capacity to deliver AI technologies, it's concentrated very much in a few big companies at the top. Let's not even start talking about quantum computing. Maybe that's another panel for the future. And we know that they're primarily United States based or increasingly Chinese based for the market in Asia, and that they're not very good. Well, it's not that they're not very good. We've not updated our tax legislation to ensure fair taxation in the jurisdiction where money's made. And our reach in some countries doesn't go as far as to where decisions are made in other countries. And what that essentially will mean is that you will see a continuation of kind of profit margins rising right for the fewest at the top, a pull in the inequality between richer and poorer people and organizations, and probably increased barriers to entry for other companies to compete. That's why the new European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, has been quite bold in talking about a European way of doing things, talking about incentivizing European companies to compete with American and Chinese companies to go the European way. Whether that can actually be delivered effectively by a political organization is a whole other debate, and I'm not entirely convinced by that, but that's why that debate has come through, because of people's understanding of the kind of consequences of just running through this quickly. And of course, this is political for us, because the Tories, who have been talking about AI probably longer than the Labour Party has, to be fair, always talk about it in the context of profit growth and business productivity. And I always remember a report from Alan Mack, who's a Tory MP who runs an APPG, and he did this report probably in 2016-17, and it talked about productivity gains and increased profit margins, and then didn't say anything about workers or the future of work or inequalities or public service delivery or kind of bias or racism or anything like that. And so we've got to make sure that we have that debate. And that's why Labour Digital, which is a group I chair, quite small, but is trying to do work within the parliamentary party and with partners to make sure that we are kind of in partnership with you guys and with others, kind of stimulating that debate, because there are things from the past we can learn from. We've just got to apply those values and learnings in the modern setting and really understand what that actually means in the real world, and then how we put forward effective policy proposals that will get the balance right between innovation and regulation, people's rights, and deliver the kind of variety of public outcomes that we're trying to achieve.
So our time, I think, to answer 50% of Adam Page's questions and Hannah's question. Hannah's question is, how can private citizens engage in the debate on AI? And Adam asks, AI is unlikely to be something where people's views are reflected in the ballot box. What would be the healthiest way to gauge people's views? So I'd like to ask both these questions to all three of you to close out this meeting. And we'll go in the order of speakers. So Ivana, why don't you start?
Yes, great question. The best way to engage with these issues is to first stop thinking that it's beyond us and they are too techies and too complicated for us to discuss them. As I said at the beginning, really, we are talking about power-related issues here. And therefore, the most important ways to talk about these things is to really discuss it with anybody as much as possible, engage with the debates they're currently having. There are all the time consultations, there are discussions, there are really trying to engage as much as possible. Use the rights that you have as a digital citizen, and so the rights to access information, the rights to and really try and be involved in as much as possible in our digital ecosystem. I think using this right is key, trying to understand where a decision about us has been made by a machine instead of a humans, and challenge things. Is absolutely important. And then join the Young Fabians, because this is the place where I think all the discussions are happening. By the way, I read my book as well. Just thought I'd mention.
I have to agree with both those points there, Ivana. Dom?
I show you the book.
Yeah, I mean, and the one thing I would say, like, just to, you know, Ivana's covered off an awful lot of that. I think that the other point I would make is, look, like, all the while this conversation is still ongoing amidst policymakers in Whitehall and elsewhere. Like, there's a national data strategy out there right now that's having some of these conversations, and they're asking. It's a public consultation, like, and so if people want to engage in it, this isn't, you know. And actually, if you look at you know, this isn't necessarily the kind of mega technical stuff that is inaccessible. I think absolutely Ivana's right. Like, this is sort of pretty core questions. So where people do want to engage, they should engage. I think that, like I said, there's a really big. I was really interested in what Darren was saying a little bit earlier about governance and global standards, and that kind of conversation about how we, you know, who owns this and what we want to do. I think that's the sort of core of this question, is like, how do we understand what role we want to play, and how do we help leverage the national assets we have as a country, whether that's the national assets of the NHS, that's the national assets of our amazing research institutions, you know, to be a part of this global, you know, part of this global conversation in the way that we choose we want to be. And so much of that is ultimately ensuring that as a society and as sort of kind of educated partners in this conversation, we're all able to sort of contribute and say, this is how we want it to go. And so, you know, from a tech startup perspective, we're trying to play our part in that, and we really appreciate that Marcus and the team of Fabians are doing the same, and I would encourage anyone who's on this call and beyond to continue to do so as well.
Thank you for that, Dom. Darren?
Well, I mean, a couple of years ago, I kept saying that I did this work in tech because I thought it was important, not because my constituents were asking me to do so. But let me tell you how many emails I got about the exam algorithm. I mean, enormous number of emails, right? Let me tell you about the amount of noise, not so much in my constituency, but immediately next door, that's happening about the algorithm deciding how many houses should be built in which parts of the country and how quickly. And there are other examples where you're not actually talking to constituents about AI standards at the ITU, but they are getting in touch with you because of artificial intelligence and algorithms and automated decision making having a real impact. Facial recognition technology, as Ivana mentioned, you know, when they see that being kind of tested. And there's many, many other examples. So the kind of public debate about this has started to kind of get more substantive because of the outcomes and the applications. And in all of them, you can talk about fairness and ethics and the role of the state and the role of private companies and what they should and shouldn't be allowed to use them for. So I'm confident that this debate is going to become more mainstream, and we've kind of got to get the balance right between selling the opportunity of the positives around this as part of a modernization agenda for the economy, but also for our public services, but also making sure we do that work about making sure it's done safely and ethically and in a way that the public trust and understand it. And we've certainly got more work to do that. So I'll echo the call for viewers to join the Young Fabians. Labour Digital is free, so you're welcome to sign up to that too. And I can also recommend Ivana's book, which I'm sure she'll be delighted for me to do as the final speaker. So back to you, Marcus.
Thank you again for everyone, both for coming and for submitting your really interesting questions for our panelists this evening. I posted the links for you to get engaged with us. Please, if nothing else, just tweet or email us directly. I'm sure we'll be able to find some way of engaging with you. Take this discussion back to your local groups, back to your households, your workplace, families, and talk about it. If not for the great good, then just for fun. So on that note, we'd love to see you again. Please stay in touch and stay engaged. Thank you, everyone.